Hi everyone, today I'm going to sketch this cashew nut chicken. I hope that you will sketch and paint along with me. My supplies for today: I've got a 2B pencil for sketching, eraser, a silver black velvet round brush size 8, Sailor Fude fountain pen with black ink, 100% cotton paper around about size A4, palette for mixing, palette of paints, water, spray bottle, and tissue for blotting. I'm going to start my pencil sketch now using my 2B pencil. I'm just going to use my pencil sketch to get the basic proportions and everything in the right place. A lot of people would jump straight in with the ink pen and start sketching with that. I don't feel entirely confident with my proportions, so I prefer to do a light pencil sketch first, just to make sure I've got everything in the right place. Things like the dimensions of the plate are quite easy to get wrong, and I'd like to just get that down first. Once I've got the basic pencil sketch down, it does give me a bit more confidence to go in with my pen and work a bit more quickly in that stage. Whilst I want to get the orientation of the plate correct, as well as the basic position of things like the spoon, fork and egg, when it comes to the rest of the dish, it's quite complicated, and I'm not going to try and get every single piece of pepper or chicken in exactly the same places in the photograph. I will use the photograph as a guide and just try and get the little bits and pieces of color dotted in throughout the sketch. I've been excited to sketch this dish for quite some time now. I was so taken with all of the colors when the plate was presented in front of me. I knew immediately that I had to take a photograph of it and sketch it the first opportunity that I could. You can sketch along with me in pencil if you wish, but if you would prefer to trace the sketch, then the link to the free downloadable and traceable PDF for the sketch can be found in the description box below. I will also place a link to my website on the screen, which you can go to access all past tutorials and downloadable PDFs. The pen that I'm using today is a Sailor Fude fountain pen, and it is filled with permanent black ink. The Sailor Fude pen is different to any other fountain pen in that it has a bent nib, as you can see in the photograph. The bent nib allows for a variation in line width depending on the angle that you hold the pen on the paper. It does take a little bit of getting used to in order to learn how to use it, but I enjoy the variation in the line widths that I get. I find it gives a little bit more spontaneity to the sketch. But any permanent fine liner pen will do for the sketch, provided that the ink inside is waterproof or archival ink. I'm going to work through the sketch now in ink, and I'm going to be conscious of trying to keep my lines a little bit wiggly, not continuously solid, and to try and break them up wherever I can. This makes the sketch look not too rigid and a little bit more fluidity to it. The ink from these Fude pens often does take quite a long time to dry because of the thickness of some of the lines. So when I'm sure that the ink is completely dry, I will erase the pencil lines before moving into watercolor. I'm going to start with the egg first, and I'm going to mix up some New Gamboge with some Hunter Yellow Medium. I'm going to work that into a very weak consistency on my brush by adding some water, and then lay that down as a base for the yolk. As I do this, I'm going to leave 2 white accent marks on the right hand side of the yolk, so that they appear to be catching the light. Once the base color yellow is down, I'm going to drop in a thicker consistency of the 2 yellow mix that I have already made. And I'm going to go back into my palette and drop in some thicker consistency of New Gamboge. Because the base layer is still wet to a degree, these colors will blend into the color that I've already laid down. I want to darken the edges of this egg yolk more to give it a more of a 3-dimensional look, so I'm going to add in some medium consistency of quinacridone burnt orange around the edges. Now I want to start working on the crispy edge of the egg, so I'm going to use a watered down mix of what is already on my brush and start by putting that as a base layer around the edge. I've got some leftover grey colour on my palette, and I'm going to water that down and use that to make a few shadow areas on the surface of the egg white. I'm making sure to keep this shadow really light on the surface of the egg and not to make it too dark. I am now going to work through the rest of the sketch and put a base color down for all of the things that I can see, the reds, greens, yellows and browns. I'm not going to really work on shadows or contrast at this stage. I just want to get a base layer of color down for everything. For this next bit, the first layer can either be completely dry or still slightly wet. I'm going to go now with a thicker consistency of each of the colors that I've already got in my palette. At the moment the sketch is a little bit flat and only one shade of each color is already on the sketch. So I'm going to go through and try and make some areas of darker greens, reds, yellows and so on to try and get some texture and contrast in the sketch. I will use the photograph to assist me in finding darker shadow areas as well as areas where there is a slight difference in color. Now I'm working on filling in the gaps that are missing in the sketch, all those gaps and holes that I haven't put any color in so far. I'm not following the photograph here, I'm just using the colors that are on my palette and filling in random colors in the background of the sketch. Once I've done that, I'm going to work on a bit more contrast, trying to add in some darker and shadow colors in the background. Now I'm going to work on putting a shadow on the inside of the plate. I'm going to work wet and wet to do this. So I'm going to lay down a water layer first and then use Payne's Grey as the shadow color into the water layer. In this latter stage of the sketch, I am always looking for areas where I can increase the contrast. I will leave the lightest areas alone, but I'll always look for areas of the sketch where I can push the darker colors even darker. Getting the largest range of contrasts that you possibly can in your sketch is what will really make it start to pop and also give it a more three-dimensional look. I'm going to use Wet and Wet again to do the cast shadow of the plate on the table. So I will put down a water layer first from the edge of the plate outwards to the right, but the cast shadow is a lot darker than the shadow of the inside of the plate, so I'm going to use a much thicker consistency of the Payne's Grey and lay that down into the water, starting from the edge of the plate and then blending the shadow outwards.